Okay, hi everyone. I'm going to start by introducing the webinar. This is a webinar on policy approaches to prevent vaping among youth. I'm Abby Stoika. I'm with the Western Region Public Health Training Center, which is one of 10 regional public health training centers funded by the Health Resources and Services Administration to support the public health workforce. And today we're partnering with the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, where I am right now, and the Hawaii Public Health Institute to bring you this webinar today. Let's see. Okay, so in this webinar, we will be discussing types of legislation that have been proposed to address e-cigarette use among youth, identifying challenges to passing policies that limit e-cigarette use among youth, and sharing strategies to increase success at passing policies that address e-cigarette use. We do have continuing nursing education units available for participants to this webinar. There's 1.0 contact hour of continuing nursing education for participation in this activity today. To be eligible for that, you have to be present during the full duration and complete the evaluation after the workshop ends sometime before July 25th. The evaluation link is linked here, and the slide will be available at the end of the webinar too, and on the Moodle page once you exit the webinar at the end. And it's password protected with the password vaping with a capital V. So these CNEs are jointly provided by the University of Arizona College of Nursing and the Western Region Public Health Training Center. Okay, great. So today our panel includes Heather Carter from the Arizona State Senate. We have Tim Gibbs, who just walked away, but is from the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. And we have Trish Lachika from the Hawaii Public Health Institute. Okay, so I will be posing a question to the panel, and we'll take turns having panelists give any response they have to these questions. But our first question we're posing first to Heather Carter, and it is, can you please summarize the policy initiatives proposed in your state to address the increase of vaping among youth?
Yes, well, thanks everybody for being here today. It's my honor and pleasure to share with you some of the work that we've done in Arizona over the last 6 months. It's been a pretty fast and furious legislative session this year. We go to session the second Monday in January, and we completed our work on Memorial Day in May. So during that period of time, I ran a number of bills to address the crisis we are all facing with the increased use of vaping products by our kids. And I am frustrated by the fact that every time we put forth a public health solution to this, we are met with not only opposition from the tobacco industry, but many times bait and switch legislation. So what we put forth from a public health perspective in Arizona were a number of things, pretty much similar to what you've seen across the state. In 2013, Arizona changed the definition of what a vaping product was in statute. Actually, the statutes were silent on it, so they carved vaping products out of the tobacco statutes, and in doing so, disconnected the vaping products from anything related to what we had in statute from keeping tobacco out of the hands of kids. We call them the youth furnishing statutes. So by no means is this the one and done solution to solving the crisis, but it's critical for at least Arizona to make sure that we treat vaping products the same way we treat tobacco products. But that is absolutely no-go with the tobacco industry. They are doing everything they can to make sure that their vaping products or any heat-related products are separate from the tobacco definition. And we spent an enormous amount of time talking about why that's important in Arizona. Unfortunately, it did not make it over the finish line, but in response to all of the debate to defining vaping products as tobacco products, there were there were a number of opportunities to continue to educate lawmakers on what is happening out in our schools and across the country. So I also added a couple other bills that we put forth. None of those bills made it too far in the process. They made it out of the Health Committee, for example, in the Senate, but then just died and never went up for a final vote. But I included vaping products in the smoke-free ordinances we have in Arizona. I increased the tax. I ran a bill to increase the tax on vaping products to bring them up to the same tax level as tobacco products, including all of the paraphernalia that goes with it. And then I ran a bill to increase both the tobacco tax and the vaping tax to basically the national standard. None of those bills made it far either. What happened, though, was extremely frustrating. As these bills were being heard and moving through the system, the one bill that was changing the definition back to tobacco products, and when I did a striker, which is a language of putting two bills together and reinvigorating them, when I got that bill out of the Senate, we were met with a competing bill over in the House side, introduced by the tobacco industry as what we like to call smoke and mirrors. They put forth a T21 bill, but that bill had the poison pill of preemption, which would have prohibited any jurisdiction to do additional regulations around tobacco, which is really problematic because we've had licensing in place in Tucson for a number of years. There are all sorts of zoning ordinances about putting smoke shops near schools. The original bill would have wiped all of it clean and even would have prevented schools from doing any additional regulations around tobacco. Very poorly drafted. They quickly realized that they had a really bad bill in their hand. So they did everything they could to try and amend the bill. The bill got a hearing. They amended out some of the smaller pieces of it. But at the end of the day, it was still a preemption bill under the guise of the T21. We were able to get that bill stopped in the House. It never went up for a final vote in the House. It did make it out of the House Health Committee. It was sponsored by a member on the House Health Committee and supported by the House Health Chairwoman. So it was really kind of a war between public health advocates, which were long, and there were a number of people involved, including schools, our cities, our towns, our counties, versus the tobacco industry's bill, which was supported by all the major tobacco retailers and the Vaping Product Technology Association, or whatever their organization is that they created to advance their legislation. So it became extremely contentious, almost to the point where lawmakers who aren't involved in health policy, meaning they're not on the health committee, were just like, I don't even want to talk about this anymore. The issue is there's still so much work that we need to do to address the youth crisis that we have with increased use of vaping products, that anything we're trying to put forth is met with extreme opposition from the tobacco industry from a number of different angles. From, as you're going to hear and you've seen across the country, any attempt to try and ban flavors is met with opposition. T21 is never, it's hard to pass that clean without some sort of a preemption in place. I think that's happening, just happened the other day over in California, if I'm correct, Tim, right? They just ran that, they ran that other bill, something like that. I'll let you talk about that, Tim. But we see this across the country, that every time a public health solution is put forth, we're met with incredible opposition from the tobacco industry, which now includes the Vapor Products Technology Association, and many times the marijuana industry as well. They also started to engage in small places around our state capital. And we were able to keep all of their work at bay, but next year I think it's just going to be as contentious as it was last year. And I'm hoping for the best and going to prepare for the worst.
Great, thank you. Do any of our other panelists have things to add about initiatives that have been proposed in your states that have or have not been successful?
Sure. This is Tim Gibbs of the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network in California, and thank you to Senator Carter for all the fantastic work that has been going on in Arizona. I touched base with my colleagues in Arizona and spoke so highly of your work and your passion in this space. You know, in California, we were fortunate in 2015 and 16 to have been able to pass a substantial package of bills, which included a clean tobacco, or mostly clean tobacco to 21, there was a military exemption in there, and a bill that regulated and defined e-cigarettes as a tobacco product. And so that was very helpful. That was leading into a tobacco tax ballot initiative that taxed e-cigarettes at the same rate as combustible cigarettes. That was ultimately successful. So, you know, in some ways we thought, wow, we had a great year. We were, you know, very successful, but that did not stop the upsurge in e-cigarettes. And what we've found is that, you know, this epidemic is very much fueled by flavors and flavor tobacco products. So, you know, as soon as we had some victories in California, we realized that the work is nowhere near done yet. And it's telling, with the fierce opposition from tobacco companies, and I'll get into the sort of challenges a little bit later, but you know, the battleground in California is around flavored tobacco products. There was a ordinance passed by the and we're mostly working at the local level now. There are 38 cities or counties in California who have passed a ordinance that would prohibit the sale of all flavored tobacco products. This is just at the retail level. There's no penalty for consumption. Online purchases are still allowed, but this gets it out of the stores and out of you know, eyesight of you know, where children are. So, you know, the first major, we've passed a few of these things in 2016, 2017, but the first major urban area was San Francisco, and that passed unanimously by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. However, as soon as it passed into law, R.J. Reynolds began collecting signatures to overturn that and put it to a referendum to the voters. And in just one city with 750,000 people, R.J. Reynolds spent $12 million to try and overturn that law. So that's telling how important flavored tobacco products are to tobacco companies. You know, in the e-cigarette space, R.J. Reynolds has views. You know, they want to keep those options open, and menthol cigarettes. It's also banned menthol, or prohibited the sale of menthol cigarettes in San Francisco. Fortunately, we won there in San Francisco. We went on to pass it in a number of cities. We're working on big campaigns in the city of Los Angeles now. Our most recent victory was my hometown in the city of Sacramento, which was very difficult. It became a proxy battle because all the lobbyists on both sides live in Sacramento. And so it became a proxy battle for state legislation. And as Senator Carter's mentioned, you know, there was a state bill this year on flavored tobacco products that was hijacked in a way that seems pretty typical of other places around the country. The chair of the committee that oversees tobacco, which unfortunately is not health, it's this other thing called the Governmental Organization Committee, where a majority of the campaign contributions from tobacco companies flow. This bill, the flavors bill, was just never set for a hearing. It was a very sort of unusual and unprecedented move. Instead of setting the bill for a hearing, the chair of the committee sort of took all the best practices from the Vapor Technology Association, from their letter in terms of what would be suggested amendments, and turned that into legislation. There is a hearing in about an hour from now that I'll have to run to oppose that legislation, but it does not hold any of the tobacco companies such as Juul, who are fueling this epidemic, accountable. It is entirely aimed at the retail level, as well as at the youth who are using these products. It would, you know, when we raised the age of sale in California to 21, we removed the criminal statute for possession of tobacco products. We don't think it's a good, there's no evidence that a law enforcement intervention is a good way to get a young person to quit smoking. This bill seeks to reassert those criminal penalties for anyone under 21 caught smoking. So, you know, we've gone from having a good flavors bill to having this thing that we're desperately fighting for, desperately fighting against. And, you know, to be blunt, we'll see what happens this afternoon. We don't think we have the votes to kill it in this committee, and we'll, you know, live to fight another day in a different committee. But, you know, that is a testament on how powerful the tobacco companies are, that they were able to sort of turn something that would impact their bottom line into something that would actually protect their bottom line. This bill also exempts mint and menthol flavored tobacco products from any sort of regulation, which is, you know, we've been calling it the Dual Market Share Protection Act. So that's kind of where we are. I'll stop talking for now and, you know, pick it up later.
Great, thank you. And Trish, can you add anything to this from Hawaii?
Yeah, I actually, before we jump to the next slide, I'll summarize real quickly. Similar to what's been shared earlier, you know, Hawaii in 2015 as well, we passed, and actually we're pretty proud of the fact that we were the first state to raise the age of sale to 21. We included e-cigarettes in our statute, making, you know, all areas that are smoke-free also vape-free, as well as other things. And if you can go to the next slide, I just wanted to put into perspective our youth vaping epidemic here in Hawaii. You know, in looking at our numbers, we all know that there's been a surge in youth vaping use across the nation, where from 2017 to 18, with the National Youth Tobacco Survey numbers, there was a 78% increase in youth vaping rates across the nation. But if you look at Hawaii's numbers, you know, this is the middle school data that we have. So our middle schoolers, based on our risk surveillance data, our state average is 16%. So it really, you know, is a lot more than what we see nationally. And we also break this down, our state breaks this down by county, because we are an island state. And you can look as the island, on the Big Island, it's as much as 23%. The next slide. For high school rates, this worries us even much more, because you can see that 26% is the state average for our high school youth. And so that's as much as, you know, a little more than 1 in 4 regularly using these products. If you look at, these are 2017 numbers, and so it's much, much higher today. When we go out into the schools, and our staff goes and makes presentations to the students every day, every single hand goes up when we ask the question, have you ever tried or been asked to try vaping? And more and more hands are going up at the elementary school level now. So if you look also similarly at the county numbers, they're much higher than the state average. And so in response, next slide, in the previous session, our session runs from January to May of each year. We really wanted to look at 2 pieces of legislation. The first is a flavor ban bill, which would prohibit the sale of all, you know, flavored tobacco products, e-cigarettes, including menthol, and then the regulation bill, which would have applied the tobacco tax to electronic smoking devices through a definition change in the tax chapter, would have required them to obtain a tobacco permit and license, because right now all they have, there's no requirement for them in order to sell the products at the retail and wholesale level. And then also to be able to make online sales unlawful to anyone except to registered sellers, which as an island state, you know, online sales is a really big loophole for us when it comes to youth access. And so we regularly annually poll registered Hawaii voters on the issue. So you can see that, you know, 8 in every 10 support regulating these products. But in summary, this session, similar to what's been shared by the other panelists, similar hijacking and similar influence from the tobacco industry. Our flavor ban bill didn't make it. It made it all the way until its final committee, but it had been killed in that committee. And then the regulation bill had just been completely gutted, and it was stripped off of all the necessary regulations, and just turned the bill into a youth penalty bill that would have shifted the responsibility from the industry to the youth who are already addicted to these products, and also to our teachers, that it would have been their responsibility to confiscate these devices, as if like the solution would only be, should rely on be with our school system. So we'll talk about the challenges in a bit, but just wanted to provide you with some context here in Hawaii.
Thank you so much. For our listeners, if you do have questions coming up, you can write them in the chat box, and we'll try to leave a couple minutes at the end to take one or two of those questions, depending on time. Our second question I'm posing to Mr. Gibbs first. What challenges have been faced in passing legislation, and what lessons have been learned?
Great. Well, I sort of touched on it a little bit earlier, but the challenges, and I would say a new challenge is specifically Juul. For years, the tobacco companies sort of operated in the shadows. Don't get me wrong, very successful in terms of stymieing any legislation. I mentioned the successes we had in 2015-16, but it had been more than a decade since anything passed in California that would have saved lives. It was a pretty shameful, long decade, and the tobacco companies basically had a committee that all tobacco legislation had to go through that never got through. So, that's where they focused their lobbying. They didn't worry about the other house. They didn't worry about much else. They just focused their efforts on this governmental organization committee, and that strategy proved effective in terms of blocking any legislation that would save anybody's life. But in terms of challenges now, one thing about the emergence of Juul and other entities like the Vapor Technology Association is that they're not necessarily out in the shadows, and they've got a case to make that they're not the tobacco companies, they're not the bad guys. Juul has a full-page ad in the Sacramento Bee 3 times a week at least. They sponsor all of the sort of Capitol, like newsletters, blogs, influential things that Capitol insiders read. They're all over the place in a way that the tobacco company, the legacy tobacco companies, Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, were not. Another challenge is they are scooping up a bunch of the best lobbyists around the Capitol, people that we would not have thought would have gone to work for a tobacco company. And so they've got some pretty talented individuals, and in fact, talented individuals that we have worked with to pass tobacco legislation. So that's pretty disheartening. Juul has also ramped up their campaign contributions. So instead of having 2 entities that are from the tobacco side that are giving large amounts of campaign contributions, you have 3, because Juul is doing that now as well. So that's made the playing field more complicated. And as I said, Juul is not necessarily in the shadows. They're trying to sell to legislators that they are a cessation device, even though the FDA says they are not. And they're trying to say that they're helping smokers quit. And, that resonates in some quarters. And so it's certainly a challenge to sort of take that on. And we have to adjust our tactics instead of just talking about the bad tobacco companies. That's still a lot of what we do, but we have to also challenge the notion that Juul is, helping people quit smoking, because obviously we all know they are not. And so, the other challenges and at the local level, while in that San Francisco ordinance I mentioned, Juul's hometown, they did not really engage in the ballot initiative, but since then they have been pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, in other localities. We've got as I mentioned, a big flavors ordinance campaign in Los Angeles where they are actively engaged. They are hiring the staff of city council members to be their representatives. So it's a definite shift in tactics over the last year from Juul, and they are basically swarming the Capitol, swarming city halls, and doing it in a way that's not in the shadows, very open. And so that is certainly tough for us to counteract. And I'll say, it's looking at this bill that we are facing this afternoon. It's a challenge. And so, we've gone from being on offense on a flavors bill to defense on a bill that would basically, ensure Juul's market supremacy. So in terms of lessons learned, I think we're still learning. I think we're still seeing what they are capable and willing to do in this legislative space. But what I will say is that from a parent's perspective, anytime we're talking to a legislator who is a parent and sees this epidemic in their children's schools, they're often not swayed and they're quite angry at Juul. And I think there's certainly something to harnessing that organic anger at these companies who are addicting their children. There are new organizations that, we did not create. They're like PAVE, Parents Against Vaping, that are just parents who got together and wanted to do something about it. And sharing their stories with legislators has been really powerful. And especially at the local level, it has proven to be very effective. And so it's hard to say what lessons have been learned when we're like even just today in the middle of a big battle, but we are working on it. So many challenges and many potential opportunities because, as I mentioned, that public anger is certainly out there.
Great, thank you. And Trisha, has the experience in Hawaii been similar to that of California?
Yes. If you go on to, so I have slides, but the next slide for Hawaii, as I mentioned, keep going until, yeah. So in 2018 was really when we experienced our first heartbreak in that preemption was introduced and passed into law in our state. And how this happened was really a surprise because a dialysis bill, so a seemingly harmless bill that was part of the governor's package that had funding attached to it, there was language insertion to include preemption, which would have removed completely our islands, our county authority to regulate the sale of tobacco products, including electronic smoking devices. Any proposals that were introduced in 2019 from each of those counties to repeal or reverse preemption were either blocked or never heard. And in 2019, this was our own bill, so the e-cigarette regulation bill that we had worked on and introduced and was widely supported by all of the state agencies, Department of Taxation, Education, the Attorney General, and the bill was gutted and had just turned it into a youth penalty and possession bill, which would have created a $100 fine for youth. Previous versions increased it all the way up to $500 and also criminalized youth for possession. and would have required teachers to confiscate the devices. Both bills in our lawmakers, perception, like because they have been written by the industry, they were provided during conference committee, which is really the final hurdle for bills to pass through our legislature. This is when both bills have passed through both chambers, and the House and Senate are just working out differences in the bills, and so it's closed off to any public testimony. And any changes made to the bill, it would be outside of our control. And I think just, lessons learned for us is that we have to start letting our other lawmakers know that it's been 2 years in a row that these changes have happened in conference committee, and that everything must be done for those bills to either avoid conference or allow any changes to take place during public hearings when members can question these changes, when the public can respond, and just kind of letting lawmakers know that this is what the industry wants. This is when they exert their control. And both bills appear on paper as if they're meant to do something good. The preemption bill was attached to an overall creation of an e-cigarette registration unit that nobody had asked for. The youth penalty bill made it seem like the state is taking action in youth. Why not create consequences for the youth that are using them in the first place? So it's clear that there's very little awareness on why youth penalty laws are a tobacco industry tactic and not a public health practice that we would want. And so they're all just educating them that these are just distractions from known tobacco control policies that we are pushing. But the good news is that yesterday our governor did effectively veto the youth penalty bill. So, on record, it's our bill that was vetoed, but it's not in content, it's not the same bill that had emerged from session. So we're looking forward to starting again next session.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Heather Carter, do you have anything to add about Arizona's experience?
Well, I think we've done a great job kind of highlighting the tactics, but I hope this works. Can you guys see that? There you go. Social media ads ran all on Mother's Day against me. So they are pretty aggressive. The words aren't going to show up on there, but they're pretty aggressive on social media. And if there's any way, the challenge is, they called the Vapor Technology Association, until I started calling them out, calls himself a grassroots organization. I'm just mom and pop vape shop trying to help people stop smoking. There's specifically one vape shop out of Prescott where this woman, she travels, and come to find out she travels across the country, so she'll be coming to a state to you, and saying, look, we're just a small business. We employ 20, 30 people, and we're in this business to help people to stop smoking. It is otherwise known as an AstroTurf organization, which means it's paid advocacy on their side. So any way that you can engage, the parents that are experiencing this, I think that is really, really helpful. I think Tim brought up a great point that these sort of true grassroots organizations have been the game changer, being able to say, look, I'm a mom, I'm a dad, I'm a teacher, this is what I'm experiencing in my class. That's been the real way, I think, that we've been able to kind of counteract the AstroTurf advocacy work. And the challenge is that trying to keep our message, the public health message, to the forefront requires diligence, nonstop effort. And it does sometimes require spending dollars on advertising and getting the message out. And yet we're up against a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think that's the challenge. It's akin to everything else you see in healthcare when you're up against an industry that has millions, if not billions and billions of dollars versus grassroots, public health, and everyday citizens saying this is really bad. So that's the challenge. And I will say it's been really challenging to try and educate lawmakers who don't work in the public health space on a regular basis when you're under attack. So if there's any way to provide education and awareness prior to any of the bills passing, I think or moving or being introduced, I think that's really helpful. But when you wait until you're under attack, that's the challenge. And I love it how Trish said, they use sneak attack strategies. I'm so glad Trish brought up conference committee, because nothing good typically happens in a conference committee, because that's where you can just get it in the middle of the night. And that's the way our original definition of vapor products happened. I even received an email from the tobacco company's lobbyists saying, we didn't do it in the middle of the night. We had hearings. Well, guess what? The bill was dead until they revived it in the middle of the night. So that's definitely some of the challenges. It is a 24/7, especially when we're in session, all hands on deck effort, and keeping grassroots advocacy engaged and involved in that is really challenging, but we have to do it.
Thank you so much. Our last question is getting a little bit more into these lessons learned, but specifically talking about what strategies you've used in your previous campaigns that can increase success at passing policies and or be used to address the tobacco industry's pushback. And we were going to start with Trisha on this one.
Great. Okay, so again, I have some slides. If you can keep going till you reach. Okay, so I'm going to talk about each of these 5 things, primarily focused on our flavor ban and our initiatives this session. But the first one, going to the next slide, please. Okay, keep going. Okay, so the first one, is to really, we focused on mounting a public campaign on our flavors bill. It was really the first time that we had really worked on this bill with our youth leading the issue. And so months prior to session starting, our youth had focused on this as their priority. With some guidance from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, we decided to make this into a separate campaign. So we created our webpage, Flavors Hook Kids Hawaii, and if you go on that webpage, you can see over 200, a list of over 200 endorsements from influencers, lawmakers, business owners, and, from the community and different organizations and youth serving organizations. We created our own logo. And then our youth, you can see in the picture, this was during Kick Butts Day, which is a national day of advocacy across the nation, where hundreds of thousands of youth are marching and standing up against big tobacco. And then the lower picture is what actually in the beginning of session, the very first few weeks, is we had a visual display right in front of the state capitol where commuters and drivers and our lawmakers can see huge words that says candy flavored tobacco hooks kids. And so we were able to get a permit to have that up for a week. You can go next page. So central to this campaign is really making sure that keep going, that this is youth. There's a strong youth voice and visibility. Youth, it really is about our youth and ensuring that we're not addicting an entire generation to nicotine and tobacco. That was central to the message, but we wanted to make sure that the youth were visible throughout the entire campaign, that the lawmakers knew that this was their policy, that to deny them, to deny flavors would mean to deny them their right to health. And this was at the state capitol with about a dozen or so lawmakers in the picture, but you can see that they really, it was a really great visual effect, and media was there too, including the First Lady and the Lieutenant Governor. Keep going. The third is consistent media coverage, only because, the tobacco industry and including the vaping industry, they spent $250,000 to oppose legislation this year. So it's much, much higher than previous years. This was the first year that Juul had registered 3 or 4 lobbyists in Hawaii. They were buying up full-page ads on the paper. The $250,000 does not include advertising and doesn't include direct campaign contributions. It's only on direct lobbying expenses, and we were clearly outspent. And so we really relied on trying to get earned media out. We relied on, we had no resources on advertising at all. And so we used op-eds, letters to the editor that were written by teachers, healthcare folks, our youth. It was also an opportunity for us to strategically put out pieces that would counter industry messaging, but would also reiterate why strong policy regulations are necessary. Keep going. The next one is really being able to have strong champions, both in the House and the Senate, as well as champions in the administration. So this picture during the launch of the visual display, you can see our partner from American Heart was dressed up as Big Tobacco, similar to what they did in San Francisco. We had the Lieutenant Governor there, Department of Education, the Attorney General's office, Department of Health. So showing like a strong front. And then I think key is not just identifying who those key lawmakers are that can move the issue. Hawaii may be a small legislature, but we introduce 3,000 bills every year. And so it's easy for those bills to get lost. It's easy for other priorities to overtake our issues too. But it was critical that we not only had strong relationships with key committee members, but also members of those committees, so that if a bill was facing a deadline, we could put pressure on a particular committee chair from the members of that committee. And we always made sure that the youth would be communicating directly with their elected official before and after. So we are an aloha state after all, and we make sure to thank them whenever they help move the bill forward. And then the last one is really staying true to messaging. Just keep going. I think if there's anything that's really important, it's knowing that the industry will do everything with their resources to distract the policies, from the issue, to distract from the issue. And so we really focus strong on the nicotine addiction, and that, e-cig vaping was really a non-existent habit a decade ago. And that, the second piece is that, we made sure to always say that candy flavors are here to lure the kids, but it really is the nicotine that keeps them coming back for more. And then also the role that menthol plays. There was significant effort to remove and exempt menthol from our bill. And then finally, regulations, are necessary, with Juul coming in and saying that they're here, that it's an adult issue, that we're trying to take away what adults need in order to quit. Strong protections that already apply to tobacco should be applied on tobacco products, should also apply to vaping products as well. And so there's no reason that e-cigarettes are defined as tobacco products in our state law, but they're not regulated as such, right? And so exempting them, it creates that loophole where youth are able to significantly access the products.
Thank you. And can we move to Heather Carter next?
So I think Trish did a great job kind of spelling out, 5 steps to really improving strategies or building strategies to fight big tobacco. The one thing that I just want to highlight that we haven't talked about is many of the issues that we face at any state legislature, no matter what state you're in, are partisan issues. So in a state like Arizona, it's Republicans versus Democrats. In Colorado or California, it would be Democrats would be in the majority and not Republicans. This is a bipartisan food fight. So You know, a lot of times we go in and we lobby, and you can lobby, you know, one side of the aisle or the other. That is not the case here. It is all over the board. And I think the strategy is try to identify, using what Tim said, the lawmakers that have kids in school. Not a parent that has a kid in school doesn't, you know, they all know that this is a crisis. Nobody will deny it. And that's what was really interesting when we got to the Capitol. And a funny story to share is one of the staff at the Capitol has a child that was moving from 6th to 7th grade or 8th to 9th grade. I can't remember, but it was making a transition from elementary school to either middle school or middle school to high school. And in the middle of all of this, she sent me a text and said, I had no idea this is what was happening in the schools. You know, their kids can't use the bathroom because if you walk into a bathroom, it's nothing but a big giant vaping cloud. The schools are already under-resourced. They don't have enough money to put adults in every single solitary bathrooms. I mean, when you talk to somebody that is a parent living this with their own child, and heaven forbid if their own child had been caught with some sort of a vapor product, that has been the most powerful thing. I found allies where I never expected to find allies. Key lobbyists who were not kind of lobbying either this issue on one side or the other, who said, yeah, my kid's in high school and I'm seeing this all the time. One lobbyist, who shall remain nameless, said his kid was part of a group of kids that went into a vape shop, purchased underage vaping products. He went back into the vape shop, gave him a picture of his son and said, if you ever sell to this kid again, I will, you know, take you to court and sue you. That lobbyist ended up lobbying, not even pro bono, but just of his own accord, saying this is really bad. We had people pop up on social media saying, yeah, this is really a crisis. And I think if you can tap into the people who are living this every day as parents, I think that's really, really successful. And then, as Trish said, when we were able to engage groups of students across the state who are working on small efforts in their state or in their schools. So like you had one school had a group of 20 kids and they were trying to curb the youth use in their school, combined with another group of kids from 150 miles away, and we did a press conference with them. That was super powerful. And last but not least, this issue, more than almost any issue I've ever worked on, does gain the media's attention. So don't be afraid of jumping out there in the media and getting every earned media you possibly can. And I think that's critically important. I was able to generate, with the partnership with our Cancer Society and our heart and lung organizations as well, we were able to keep this at the forefront of people's minds because we continually held press conferences. I loved what Trish did there at the Capitol, and I think we should do that in Arizona. So any way you can leverage earned media is also really successful.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Tim Gibbs, do you have anything to add?
Oops, having trouble getting off of mute. Just taking on what Senator Carter said in terms of partisanship, you know, it doesn't sort of settle out along the lines you think it might. The biggest roadblocks in California, a very blue state, are Democrats. Most of the campaign contributions in California from tobacco companies go to Democrats. And I think one of our biggest successes, the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, is a 501c4 organization, is being able to shine the light on the campaign contributions. Every quarter, when the campaign contributions are released from the tobacco companies, we blast it out to the media. We say which members of the legislature are taking the most campaign contributions, and not shockingly, the chair of this committee, where the all the tobacco bills go to die, takes the most by far in the legislature. And that sort of electoral campaign finance argument has moved over into the legislative argument. And every time the newspaper reports on our tobacco bills, or if they're running into trouble, they also talk about the tobacco money issue. So I think having strategies, having organizations who can highlight those issues is important. And I think that tobacco companies are ruthless and relentless. And, we've got to be able to, use some of those hardball tactics as well. Obviously, I mean, we accurately think we are wearing the white hats and we are doing good things, but we've also got to be prepared to, battle with the tobacco companies, not necessarily use their deceptive tactics, but to call them out and call their allies out, frankly, who are furthering their objectives, and especially call out their allies within the legislative body who are facilitating these, these bad actors, the tobacco companies.
Great, thank you so much. So we do have some time for questions. If you are a listener, you can type any questions in the chat box. But first, I want to give our panelists time to see if they have any questions for each other first about their experiences, any questions about those experiences, how they differ, or other questions.
I just want to say good luck to Tim today.
Thank you. We're gonna need it.
And if I can help tweeting anything out from your neighbor state, happy to do it.
Sure. That sounds fantastic.
Okay, I do have two specific questions to Tim about Tobacco 21 in California. The first is about whether that decreased e-cigarette sales, and if so, how much? And the second is whether it includes an exemption for military personnel.
Yeah. In terms of the decrease in sales, it is still being evaluated. It's relatively new. It, say, around the June of 2016 went into effect, and shortly thereafter we had a $2 tobacco tax. So it's hard to segment those things out and figure out what, certainly we have seen a decrease in sales, but it's hard to say whether that was tobacco tax or tobacco to 21. I know there are studies and surveys going on over sort of multiple years to try and figure that out, but we don't have the data yet. As to the second question, yes, unfortunately, there is a military exemption in the tobacco to 21 law. It was part of a larger package, which included regulating e-cigarettes as a tobacco product, and we had a choice of, passing the package or not passing the package with that exemption in there, and it was, we had to move forward on it.
Great, thank you. Another question is regarding how do you respond to the notion of e-cigarettes as a harm reduction tactic for those that are smoking? And I think this might not just be related to youth, but in general.
I can take it, I guess, or just, there are all kinds of studies that show that for every person that goes from quitting combustible cigarettes to only being a single-use e-cigarette users, there's many, many, many more children who start using e-cigarettes and are initiated. It's just not a trade that's worth making.
And I think it's also important to really focus on the legislation at hand. This is what I experienced in Arizona, is that as I was moving the bills forward and testifying in committee, the tobacco industry would say things about my bill that just weren't even true. So, it's back again, it's the smoke and mirrors, bait and switch. They try to say, oh, you're going to prohibit law-abiding adults from getting this. Well, you've really got to look at the legislation in front. I mean, are we going to outlaw absolutely everything? There will be no more cigarettes on the market. There will be none of no nicotine products on the market. Would love to have that law, but they make it sound like the bills that we're advancing is that, and it's not. And so you just have to hold their feet to the fire and say that's not true. It's absolutely not true.
On our end, we've just been focused on the message that, vaping has really created an entire new generation that have never smoked smoked any combustible tobacco. They're addicting that generation, but I think even more important is that they're there to perpetuate people's habits instead of to completely quit. And by completely quitting, it's not the same as switching from cigarettes to vaping. And so with very little evidence that these are, and there, no FDA approvals on both the safety and effectiveness of these as cessation products, they're creating more harm by really attracting a generation that would have never used or been attracted to tobacco products in the first place.
Great, thank you. I think this may be our last question that we have time for, but do you have any information on health disparities that are associated with vaping in terms of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and what, if any, are the related policy issues?
I don't have that information.
Okay.
For this presentation. That if I were asked that question in committee, I would obviously look to my health advocacy organizations for information. And so I just partner with people that have that information. I think also another interesting aspect of this related to that question is about collecting the data and the information about the use. Here's what I find frustrating, just like what Trish said. If you stand in front of a classroom and you ask them who has either tried it or is using it on a regular basis, the majority of the hands are raised. And it is, I think, much worse than what is shown in the surveys that we collect. And I think there's a problem also with the fact that the surveys are using words like e-cigarettes, vaping, and so forth, but the kids don't think they're using an e-cigarette. That's not the language they use. They think they're juuling. It's a verb. So interestingly enough, I did an interview with a local student at the college level TV station, and he said, and we were doing it on another topic, and I said, you really should cover the story on what's happening here with the war between the public health and the tobacco industry. I said, vaping's a problem. And he goes, oh, vaping's not a problem at our university. But he goes, I'll tell you what is, juuling. So when we're collecting data, we got to make sure that we're using words that actually get us the information that we need.
So to the question just about the data, that there are studies that does exist. I don't have most of it at hand, but I will say what we do know is menthol is particularly targeted towards the LGBTQ community, the African American community, and it's one of the reasons the tobacco companies fight so hard to have that exempted from any flavor restrictions. It's one of the reasons we're opposing a bill today that has a cutout for menthol and mint.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're out of time now. So I just want to thank Heather, Tim, and Trish for joining us today. And all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in. This I believe this was recorded. So it will be available on our Moodle site and on the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center website for those that want to tune in later and watch the recording. Again, if you are interested in continuing nursing education, you can go to the link on this page, go to the quick link sidebar to CPE evaluations and use the password vaping with a capital V to get your nursing education units. And that's all. Thank you. Thank all three of you for joining us today again.
Thank you.